خلينا نرحب محمد حمايل لفقرة spoken word. Okay.
No, I'm fine. مساء الخير. I'm not gonna be that impressive as Joanne. Good evening. Life is 10% of what happens to you. It's 90% of what you make of it. 21 years ago, a 13-year-old Palestinian boy saw a protest march by in his neighborhood. Excited, he followed them through to the entrance of his hometown. He saw young men throw stones at armored jeeps. He saw soldiers carrying automatic rifles. He didn't understand much of what was going on. He didn't understand why those young men braved bullets, tear gas, flashbangs, crying no against the status quo that was set up against them. He saw reporters wearing flak jackets next to their news vans. He saw photographers wearing their flak jackets amidst the youth throwing stones. They looked so cool. Keeping their calm in the midst of the chaos around them. Little did that little boy know that one day he would be donning a flak jacket just like them. 14 years ago, a college dropout left the IT lab. Numbers were being crunched. Chewed, spat out, used to create code. He went back, decided to finish school. Introduction to Political Science 101. Fine Arts. Introduction to Media 101. A large auditorium, a professor with a cigarette-stained mustache. The professor spoke of hardships, struggles, prison, sweat and tears, blood. Everything he went through in his life. In the mind of that dropout, images of those journalists from his childhood flashed through his mind. The child inside giggled, as if he took a step closer to realizing a dream. His social media accounts were funnily abuzz with different activists and journalists, their work, what was going on. Daydreaming of the day that he will grab his own camera and capture what was happening. 12 years ago, a young man took his first steps towards realizing a dream, working one job to the next, editing, taping, photography, capturing everything that fell in front of his camera's lens. Filling up tape after tape. We had tapes, mini DVs. One day, an old college friend approached him. The next, he was standing in front of a camera. This was new. They call it a pilot, a test, an examination, to see if the young man can speak to an audience. He was shaking, not afraid, a little excited, maybe a little afraid. He never dreamed he would be here. In the days that followed were a series of unfortunate events. Once again, the land that the young man called home was set on fire. He was there, standing amidst the bullets, the tear gas, and the flashbangs, speaking to a camera, broadcasting to homes around the world. The young man threw stones around him. They were being chased by soldiers carrying automatic rifles. Over the years, he witnessed a lot of amazing things, like a young boy overcoming an injury, using his prosthetic leg, replacing the leg he lost to an Israeli sniper. He also witnessed some horrible things, like the smell of death in the Dawabsha family home. It was in the late July 2015. There were also names you'll never forget, like 13-year-old Ahmed Sharaka. He met Ahmed in the protests in 2016. The clashes hadn't begun yet. Israeli military forces were just preparing. This little boy, it's like this tall, wearing a mask. His eyes met Ahmed's eyes. He was putting on his flak jacket. Taking a puff from his cigarette, he told the boy to leave. The boy refused. The next day, the boy's friends were crying their eyes out. Ahmed fell to a bullet in the neck. In his pocket, they found a bag of cheap chips and 2 shekels and a half, a cab fare home. A few months later, New York, Washington, D.C., New York, and back. An ocean away from everything, really. And it's funny how it's kind of sad as well to see pain through a screen. You could see events unfold on your phone, on your TV, on your computer at work. It's funny because it's like a deaf man listening to music. Doesn't make sense. You can't feel pain through a screen. Still, it was comfortable. Watching from afar, far away from the pain. It was safe, far away from the bullets too. It was the Trump years. Seeing pain from afar is not the same. To see a megalomaniac in the White House. See, the major problem, or rather, one of the major problems is, there are many major problems. But one of the many major problems with governing people is who gets to do it, or more specifically, who manages to get people to let him do it to them. To summarize, it's a well-known fact that those people who must want to rule other people shouldn't be allowed to. Or to summarize the summary, anyone who's able to become president just shouldn't be allowed to be president. This president in particular was about to do something drastic. The young man was told that something was going to happen in the land he called home. A little over 20 hours later, he was in a van heading towards Ramallah. The air was filled with the stench of a water treatment plant. The smell of the old country hits different. That's what a passenger said jokingly. He was half right. The smell of the old country does hit different. The day the embassy moved to Jerusalem was the day not only the young man felt powerlessness, but an entire people felt that as well. See a man full of himself and whatever McDonald's passes by for a cheeseburger. Just sign a piece of paper. There you go. 3 years ago, the young man, bitter and sour from international media outlets, quit. So he bartended and other bits and odd jobs here and there. Thing about depression, a human being can survive almost anything if you can see the end in sight. Depression, on the other hand, it's so insidious. Daily it accumulates. It seems impossible to see the end. But the late poet Khalil Gibran once said, "Sadness is a wall between 2 gardens." A non-poet, not so late young man would say, "There's always hope. Let's grab a sledgehammer." 9 days ago, he was on the street. A police officer was telling him to turn off his camera, that he should stop filming. So, bravely, he stopped filming. Taking a few steps back, he and his colleagues stood aside, watching and updating the newsroom of the events on the ground. As the riot police arrived, the protesters were being assaulted and arrested. Screams of young girls and children filled the air. As they were heading to the car, it's no longer safe here. They were walking away when they were grabbed as well. Masked men dragged them across the street, beat them, dragged them, beat them some more, clothing torn, and then, boom, arrested. Standing inside the Criminal Investigation Division, he couldn't sit down. He looked around and saw no criminals, just people whose only crime was demanding to see their loved ones released. No one should be arrested for speaking out loud. That night, he had two fears. The first, his mother coming home, not finding anyone. After all, he had the only key. The second, seeing his colleague thrown on the floor, breathing, bleeding, seemed like it was his last moments. "It's going to be all right. It's going to be a long night. Relax," said one of the youth in the room. But he couldn't sit down. Honestly, the moment he did, he couldn't get back up. He responded to the youth, "We're leaving tonight." The first hour passed, nothing. In the middle of the second hour, he demanded to be allowed to make a phone call. Calling his brother, he told him he was jailed. He's going to be a little late. But to expect their mother, as she was home soon, and she's going to be locked out. His brother inquired, "Should we get a lawyer?" No. After all, he had faith in the team he was working with. After the call, he waited. Another hour passed, and then nothing happened. So he waited some more, and then another hour passed, and nothing continued to happen. Time is a funny thing when you have no way of telling it. Its passage seems infinitely slower, especially if you're in a windowless room with a neon buzzing above your head. Eventually, they called his name. Time to go home. The officer said it with a smile and a chuckle. He asked him to sign a pledge, not to attack any police officers. The irony was just lost at that point. But it was at that moment he realized something in that room inside the Criminal Investigations Division. He discovered something about himself. I may not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I've ended up where I needed to be. I'm a storyteller, a voice for the voiceless, in one of the most difficult places in the world. As Edward R. Murrow would say in his CBS show back in the 70s, good night and good luck. Thank you.